Let's talk about interviewing. It's spring, a lot of students are graduating right now, so I'm getting a lot of requests for basic interview tips. Before you go into an interview, make sure that you've refined your elevator pitch. Your elevator pitch is just basically what you would tell someone about yourself if you just had 1 minute with them in an elevator. And it's a good way to get across your personal brand, your skill set, and what you're all about in a concise manner. Make sure you're prepared to deliver that before you go into interviews because they are surely going to ask you, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? And you want to make sure that you're direct and concise in your answer. You also want to make sure you research the company really well ahead of time. So not just who they are and what their mission is, but what are their values? What's their product lineup? Who are their customers? What's going on with them recently. And you can learn that stuff by looking at their website and reading recent news articles that have been published about the company. Go through the job description with a fine-tooth comb and pull out all the competencies that they're looking for the role. List them out on paper, and then spend some time reflecting on your background with those competencies and writing down specific examples that you think best reflect how you have actually exhibited those skills and competencies. That way, in the interview, when you're asked to talk about those examples, you've already thought them out and you're ready with a great answer. Always be early to an interview. On time is late. You don't need to be an hour early. You don't want to appear too overeager, but try to be at least 5 minutes early. You want to be respectful of people's time, and they should never have to wait for you. I actually like to arrive about 10 to 15 minutes early to an interview so that I can spend a little bit of time in the bathroom ahead of time practicing some posturing techniques that I learned from Amy Cuddy's TED Talk. And basically, you can go look at the TED Talk. It's a great talk. But what she talks about is basically power posing for 2 minutes before you go into an interview to make yourself more confident. And there's a lot of research behind this. I can tell you from experience that it actually works. If you spend 2 minutes before the interview, I know it sounds crazy, standing in a bathroom stall exhibiting some kind of power pose that makes your body bigger. I like to just stand up with my shoulders back and put my hands on my hips. And 2 minutes is a very long time, but it will actually make a noticeable difference in how confident you feel going into the interview. When you go into the interview, you may be meeting with just one person or you may be meeting with a group of people. Regardless of how many people it is, it's really important to shake the hand of every single person in that room and make eye contact and tell each and every one of them how grateful you are for the opportunity. Make sure you maintain eye contact throughout the interview. It's much easier to maintain eye contact when you're listening than when you're speaking, so you may have to practice maintaining eye contact while you're speaking ahead of time. The other thing that I like to tell people is to make sure that where you're looking when you're making eye contact is appropriate in a professional situation. I know it may seem obvious, but it's actually not to a lot of people. When you're in an interview, you want to be looking in this region, which is the professional gaze region. So between the eyes and the forehead. You don't as much want to be looking in this region because when you go between the eyes and the lower part of the face, that's actually more of a social gaze and it sends people nonverbal cues that are more social than professional. And under no circumstances do you want your eye contact to drop into the chest region, which is intimate gazing and is going to send the wrong message altogether. If you keep your eyes here and above, you're going to be just fine. When it comes to technical interview questions, I always like to go to the whiteboard if there is one, because most of the time interviewers are more interested in your thought process and how you approach and solve problems than your actual answer. And you may not always know the right answer, you may not always get it right, but if you can demonstrate that you have a thorough thought process and you know how to use the scientific method, people are going to be really impressed. I know this may seem like common sense, but tell the truth in an interview. You never want to lie to an interviewer. It doesn't do them a service and it doesn't do you a service. You don't want to spend the next 5 years of your career having to cover up some stupid lie you told in an interview. And you also don't want to misrepresent yourself because you don't want to end up at a company that's not the right fit for you anyway. Do not overshare in an interview. You don't need to share your personal troubles with these people. So that means don't talk about relationship problems or your divorce or your diarrhea or your bankruptcy. I'm not saying that you should be ashamed of any of those things, but that doesn't mean you have to talk about them in an interview. In addition to coming prepared with a great elevator pitch and some concrete examples of how you've exhibited the competencies they're looking for, you want to spend some time preparing answers to some of the very common interview questions that you're almost always going to be asked. Those are things like, what are your greatest strengths? What are your weaknesses? What's your greatest accomplishment? What's your greatest failure? What excites you about this job or the company, or basically some variation of why do you want to work here in this role? I actually like to write down answers ahead of time to those questions and rehearse them a little bit, because even though in the interview they don't end up coming out the same way, I feel that I'm able to be more concise and get all of the points across that I want to make sure I make if I practice ahead of time. Always come prepared with questions to ask them. Not only does it show that you're serious about the job and you're really thinking about it, but you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. You want to make sure this company is the right fit for you and that the job is something you actually want to do. So make sure you ask your questions, and always make sure that the interviewer leaves time at the end for you to be able to ask questions. That's not rude, that's expected, and that's absolutely standard procedure. Make sure you follow up right after the interview to thank each and every person who interviewed you. Don't just thank the manager, thank everyone you met that day. Some people like to send handwritten thank you notes, and I've done that before. I usually end up sending emails because I don't find that the handwritten thank you notes seem to make that big of a difference, at least in technology. But you kind of have to feel out the organization you're interviewing with and what their values are and how they do business to determine whether a handwritten thank you or an email is more appropriate, or maybe even a phone call. But the important thing is make sure you follow up right away. If you're one of those people who gets really nervous about interviews and struggles a little bit, don't feel bad. You're not alone. We've all been there. Even the most successful people have bombed an interview before. You will get better with practice, so you want to make sure you seek out opportunities to practice, whether it's mock interviews or reaching out to a career coach who can help you with your interviewing skills. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or you'd like to get some more information. Otherwise, get out there and kick some butt.